Welcome to A Pair of Bookends, the book club you can carry anywhere. We are your hosts and hopefully your new bookish pals. I'm Hannah MacDonald.
And I'm Lydia Clare. Welcome, Bookends, to another instalment in our debut Spotlight series, where we shine a light on the freshest authors and their work. Today, we have the privilege to share with you the debut novel, Happy, an ingenious and daringly cinematic story about a young man who is not only searching for himself, but romance, art, and a vivid life. The trouble is, Happy learns that the life of an immigrant may not always lead to freedom. Beautiful, heartbreaking, and passionate, a truly unique debut.
Celina Baljeet Basra is a writer and curator based in Berlin. She studied art history in a global context at the Free University of Berlin and has since worked with Berlin Biennale Gallery intern, Nature Mort Delhi, and other institutions at local and international level. Her residencies include stays with Kochi Biennale and Shanghai Curators Lab, and she was awarded both curatorial and literary research scholarships from the Berlin Senate. She's a founder of the Department of Love, a curatorial collective, and her innovative debut novel, Happy, will be published by Wildfire on the 14th of November. Lena, welcome to A Pair of Bookends.
Thanks so much for inviting me. I'm so happy to be here. Can't wait to chat with you.
We are so happy to have you, and forgive the pun. And I have just said that I knew I was going to butcher many pronunciations in my introduction, so let's hope that I'm successful for the rest of the conversation with not messing anything up, but we will see. Just to quickly flag to our listeners, I don't have a microphone today, so the sound may be a little bit different today, but we are hoping that it will be as clear as usual, maybe not so much, but we hope so. And I'm sure this will be a great conversation anyway, so I'm sure you'll all enjoy. And Lydia, do you want to kick us off with our favourite question?
Absolutely. So we always ask our authors when they come on, what are you currently reading?
So right now I'm reading, I always read many books at once, but I'm reading Olga Tokarczuk, Flights. And the mispronunciation, it goes for me as well. I'm, quite heavy on it. Especially it's interesting sometimes when you've only read things and never heard them being said out loud. That's just a given. So Flights, I love. I've only started reading it after I finished the editing process of the novel. But I was so happy to discover it because of the sort of scattered, broken up structure in little, episodes. And also always very fond of an author who also imbues knowledge. So you have these little paragraphs that are almost like an entry in a dictionary, or, you learn a lot. And then she takes you on these journeys and thinking about our life in flight, basically. So it's an ingenious novel, of course. And also I've just started reading Do You Remember Being Born by Shawn Michaels. He is a fellow Astra House author. And I started reading and it's one of those books that really draws you in. So this is something I'm enjoying right now. And it's about a poet, a sort of an aging poet, working with an AI sort of machine. So yeah, both of those books I enjoy immensely so far. I just finished the Flights.
Who's the first book you mentioned? Who was that by?
Oh, Olga Tokarczuk.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. I can send you the name after, so maybe someone can pronounce it in the correct way.
I'm glad it's not just me. I'm glad it's not just
me. It's me too. The listeners will have so much fun
not
understanding a thing.
No, they both sound great. And I would love to know, what is your reading like during your writing process? Are you able to read whilst you're writing, or do you need to kind of have a break from the books whilst you focus on your own book?
Yeah, it's interesting. I do think it can happen if a book really draws you in, that you start living in the language and the world of the book. And then when you're writing or editing, you subconsciously still continue to live in. I don't know whether that makes sense, but sometimes it's good to have a clear mind from other literary works and maybe just read other types of writing. As I said, very keen on I mean, my character Happy is sort of like a professional Googler, so he likes, a sort of dangerous half knowledge maybe of things where you sort of research a lot but never go into depth. But I like to read about other subjects while I'm writing. It's sometimes inspiring to look at a piece of video art or watch a movie, a song, of course. So all these other kinds of media to surround you. A smell. Oh, smells are so important to me. That can really be inspiring. Be outside, take a walk. So yeah, sometimes good to take a pause from reading too much when you're writing.
I love that. That's like a whole sensory writing experience. That's beautiful. Now, how we usually start off our debut spotlight episodes is by asking what your experience has been like as a debut author. So could you talk us through what it's been like for you in writing your first book and in the lead up to it being published?
Of course, yeah. It was sort of a whirlwind. I do think that the idea for Happy, or the initial spark, sort of came to me when I was still a kid or a teenager. Like it was percolating for many years, and there are lots of first drafts hidden away on old hard drives. So there is a whole constellation of references that went into it, but I only found his voice truly like maybe 5 years ago or 4 years ago, when I then started writing this version of the book, sort of in a sort of very sort of energetic sort of push. And it was very good that I had a deadline, like the birth of my daughter was sort of the deadline to finish the first draft. And then I was very lucky that the book got sold a few weeks after I gave birth. But then the editing process was quite intense. So that was basically the first year of my kid. So yeah, it was amazing to finally, after so many years of always writing, working in the art world, to find the courage to get my writing out and sort of be able to share it with people and think, okay, now I'm there after maybe 20 years of thinking about that story. So it's been a long time in the making, but then it happened very quickly. And I was so lucky and privileged to have an amazing author by my side, Deborah Deem of Asper House, and to then have an intense editing process to bring this novel into shape, a process that I also enjoyed. So parts were hard, of course, and lots of working at 5 a.m. When it was still dark in Berlin winter, and my partner was taking care of my daughter. It was all a bit crazy, but from the beginning, I had my own space. I was reclaiming my own space again with this book, which two wonderful things happening at the same time. And of course, you learn about a lot of things about publishing as you go. I was so naive, or not very informed about many things, because I've worked for many years in the art world, and then I got a quick crash course in publishing and how it works, and that I had really great people by my side, my agent Alexander Reubert, and the amazing editor and people at Astra House were really wonderful. So I was lucky, and it was a wonderful experience.
You've essentially birthed two babies at once in one go, because you've conceived this book and you've had a child at the same time. I think that's I'd be bragging about that a lot more than you. You're very humble about it. I mean, as far as flexes go, like that is the biggest flex I've ever heard. Like, that's amazing.
Yeah. Or maybe I should flex more. I need to learn that. That's another thing, when you have to sort of talk about this thing that you made, and then I'm so used in helping other people birth their art babies and talk about those, as a curator. But then, doing it for myself, it's the hardest thing. And it's a totally different, but also immensely beautiful, that there are suddenly other people to take care of and help you bring this out into the world, because you do need people to bring it out into the world. And and that was also beautiful and empowering. And
that's incredible. I mean, hats off to you. And me and Lydia always use the phrase, it takes a village. So, clearly that has, been the case with you, but I think that's a huge achievement to have done those things in the same in the same, I don't know, was it in the same set of months? Like, I was going to say
Yeah,
year,
yeah.
but it feels like it was a bit tighter than that time
Yeah,
frame.
definitely. It was crazy and intense, and I'm only starting to wrap my head around it now that like pub date is coming up so quickly, or that it was crazy, but also beautiful.
So moving on to your book, as I mentioned in the intro, it is very much a book that has a lot of light and shade within it. And it tackles very difficult subjects and themes, but with this brilliantly, hysterically funny side as well. What was it like for you to try and balance the tone of the book?
I think that there was never a moment when I thought, oh, that I'm trying to balance the tones. It really happened in the writing process and then the editing, of course, that somehow in trying to grapple with this subject, which at times, or in general, is so dark, I naturally always found my way into this balance. It happened really organically. And as I said, even if the writing process was sort of condensed over maybe 2-3 years, it took a long time. It was a long time in the making to bring the thought process and the threads of this book together. And so I feel often when talking about things that are hard to talk about, this is the way that I end up finding, this is the voices I end up, going into the balance between light and dark. Yeah, so this is how it happened. It happened very organically and it made sense to me, at least while writing it, because I had a lot of fun writing this book. It was a joy to write, but then, of course, some parts took time to work through beforehand.
I think you can definitely feel your joy of writing in the novel. It has this and it's difficult to describe to bookends. Just pick the book up and read it because you'll know what I mean as soon as you read it. But it has this essence of sort of optimism throughout, despite the fact that there's a lot of difficult things that happen in the book. And I genuinely think that you do that with such skill, like, because it's so difficult, I think, to get that tone right. And the fact that you've done it instinctually is just even better. Well, of course. It's brilliant.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so happy that it comes across because you're so far in there that you never know how it might really transport or, appear or feel to the reader in the end. And I never set out to say, oh, I want to find a happy way to communicate a hard, sort of a dark subject. That was never my approach, somehow. But also to say that often we as people, if we encounter hardship, if we encounter things that are hard to process or maybe impossible to ever process, it depends on your character. That sometimes the instinct is to you get used to anything, really, the most insane things as a human being, and to find a way to survive sometimes does mean to put on a smile, and that's not always healthy. It can be a coping mechanism, and I don't think sometimes you're allowed to escape. I remember there was an older relative of my family who told my parents, she's reading too much as a kid. Like she's not living in real life. I don't think she's living in the real world. And I do think it's sometimes okay to do that. And sometimes it's not an unhealthy way to deal with things that are happening to you or around you. Of course, in the end, it's all about the balance. And sometimes you have to face the facts. But then, yeah.
I think that's the way of a lot of artists and creatives. I mean, me and Lydia are both actors, and we both write as well. So I think, we've spent most of our lives with our heads in books and living in our own imaginations, and our imaginations do tend to run away with themselves at times. But I think, that's just the sign. I think that's a really beautiful thing, and it's something to treasure, is like, that's just a part of you is your big imagination, and you really get a sense of that with your protagonist, Happy, because he might be experiencing these really awful things, but we don't necessarily find out about them straight away because he's so ambitious and he's got this huge imagination, and he's telling us about all these exciting stories and all these exciting different things, rather than immediately just settling on the bad, if that makes any sense. So I really loved the way that you explored that. And I think it was almost kind of, I don't know, I hope you take this as a compliment because it's meant as one, but it's almost, like Shakespearean in the sense that it has these real big moments of comedy with this character, but then we also have this real tragedy. And I thought, as Lydia said, you manage this balance so perfectly. I'm trying so hard not to give anything away. but we have these moments where we're laughing and it's very playful, and we're experiencing sort of these joyful moments with him, and he's in his own little world. And then you really kind of hit us with these moments of like, it's almost like a gut punch, and you're like, oh my gosh, like that's awful. And I'm not going to say what I'm talking about because people just need to read this for themselves. But I just think, as Lydia said, it takes great talent to be able to do that. So sorry, we're just going to shower you with compliments for this episode. That's it.
Thank you so much. I love it. I'm eating it all up. It's like I'm bathing in it over here.
But I think it's also hard to talk about your book without talking about the structure. And I think we both really want to hear you speak about that, because it is structured in this totally unique way, and it's split into 6 parts if we include the prologue and the epilogue. And it's also made up of these like many different sections in each part, and each have titles, and these sections are totally different in style and format. Some of them are like a sort of family tree, and then some are like almost written as like lyrical, and then some parts are like conversations or scripts that he's writing. They're all very different things. So could you kind of talk us through how you sort of curated that?
So I think that the premise was, once I found Happy's voice and I really got into the writing process, I really felt that some stories are best told in a scattered way, because I don't believe in this big linear narrative that is a whole and complete and is written by a male author who has endless amounts of time and just, So I do feel there's something about different kinds of voices. May they be female or otherwise silenced in history. May they be educated in a different way. May they be speaking a different language. May they have only chunks of time to dedicate to whatever they want to dedicate their art to. So sometimes, I do feel that especially stories of migration or flight, basically people on the move, they do maybe tell their stories in a different way. And I felt as if the readers might encounter a big bag of notes and stories and songs and basically whatever Happy produced, and also to incorporate different voices to sort of break up Happy's wide-eyed perspective of the world with voices from his family or colleagues, workmates, and the objects he touches, to let a tree speak. I'm not sure how to sort of go more into it without sort of saying too much, but so there was something that really for me helped me tell the story, and also gave me so much joy in writing it.
Yeah, you really get a sense of that. And I don't think it gives too much away to say, the way that the book is structured and the things that sort of narrate the book. I was really intrigued actually by your use of personification and this almost like humanization of objects. And I don't know, because you just said you're worried about giving too much away. So I'm now worried. Is that question giving too much away? Do you not want to go into that?
No, I'd love to. Please.
Okay, amazing.
Please, break up the structure.
So you have these moments where obviously we've spoken about how these parts and sections in the book are very different in formatting, and we have these moments where objects are almost narrators. So we have like flour that narrates, as in the powdered flour, not a plant, and we have luggage that narrates, and then we also have things as big as Europe as a narrator. What drew you to using these specific objects and things and places as narrators?
I've been thinking about it too, and something that probably wasn't clear to me is the fact that I'm, by training an art historian, a curator, I work with, artworks, objects. Not all of them are object-based. In fact, most of my focus is on art that is performative, situation, or video art. But still, there's maybe a fascination with, I think the starting point or the originary idea was, I think I was flying back from Kochi in 2019 after a workshop at Kochi Biennale, and I got lost on a stopover in Dubai airport, and I think I started making notes for this story told from a perspective of a bag, or just, so this is what then, became I'm a Bag, which is one of the chapters or short vignettes of the book. And I have been thinking about what's the most essential thing you need, because a lot of the book is also about what are the essential things to make up a home. And sometimes your home is just a bag, and not even that. Maybe it's a plastic bag filled with some essential things, and maybe that's just it. And that's what you then unpack if you are in a transient or temporary home or room, if you're lucky. And so the bag, which carries the essential objects, is sort of one central motive. And then from then on, I unfolded it. And then there's a necklace that it was actually, I think, in the same workshop in Kochi, an art historian sort of talked to us about a necklace that after partition has been split between India and Pakistan. So two museums now hold two halves of this necklace that is age old, in the, made in the culture of Mohenjo-daro, and then split and made into two new necklaces. And so all these objects, like a bag of flour, which you can then use to make rotis or bread, make up sort of Happy's world. And are all sort of, some are essential, some are beautiful, but they're things you touch, things you use, and that sort of also make up a character, in my view. So that's why I sort of went into it and also had fun with it. But yeah, they're important voices to contribute to the whole book in the end.
Yeah, and it took me a moment when I first started reading it, which shows that maybe I read too much. Maybe I don't read as much like non-linear, or I don't even think it's that. This felt far more like abstract than the usual things that I go towards. Would that be the right word to use, Lydia?
I would definitely say that that is the correct, like that it's, for me it felt very much sort of, I'm a big fan of like absurdist theatre and theatre of the absurd, and a lot of the times that it's a way of kind of making you think about the subject in a different way. And I think that it's really interesting the way that you did it, because you do feel like you're piecing together his life. You are in essence, you are the creator, because you are going around and saying, okay, well, this is this, and then that's that, and you come to the conclusion yourself, which I think is really interesting. But yeah, I would say that was the right word.
Thank you. Lydia has to be my dictionary forever. So, but when I first read the parts of the book that were narrated by objects, it really threw me for a second, and I was like, oh, okay, well, like, is this Happy and how he feels? And I think, it was so interesting to sort of find those parallels between how we feel as living beings to like to imagine what an object might feel like, because we never really consider that. So I found that really interesting to sort of find those parallels. And I think, as Lydia said before, like, it has this sort of lightness to it. And I think that sort of brought that in. It just made it feel all the more playful for me. And yeah, I really enjoyed that. So thank you.
That's so lovely to hear. And yeah, I do think it can be both. It can be an additional voice or an extension of Happy's voice, or as if he had written it, but it can also be just, I don't know, if old movies, there's like US movies from the 50s, 60s, but also maybe Indian cinema, if two people kiss or have sex, and then you see an image of two trains crashing into each other, or like fruits or a fountain, there's all things that in cinema symbolize or enhance or support the story and show what cannot be shown, or the blanks, fill in the blanks. So maybe that's also something like that.
So are you quite drawn to reading books like this? And I say this because me and Lydia are so nosy because we love our books and we love reading so much. So from the perspective of a reader, are these the kind of books that you're drawn towards, or is this like you've not seen this type of book before, so you wanted to write it yourself?
Oh, of course, in the beginning, I also worried about some aspects, like will I, lose readers if I have these sort of the structure as I, in the end, wrote it. And I think definitely there are books that are structured in a way that you have these, shorter episodes. And I do think part of it speaks to our current attention span, in the age we live. So something about it can be even sort of nice to read and sort of to have with you on the go as you're traveling. But then when I read Olga Tokarczuk, I was really happy that I only read it after, because that was, for me, a good thing. I needed to sort of conceive of happy as my own thing and not, try to copy another structure, which I really didn't do. It was also a way for me to, of course, as someone who, was trying to write your first novel, to trick yourself into, to give yourself lots of new beginnings, to always get into it with fresh energy and a fresh eye, and not to get stuck, but to still feel the love throughout the book, and keep it going, keep the energy, which for me was very important. So yeah, that was maybe another reason.
Well, you definitely do that, let me tell you, because it's just such a wonderful book. And one of the kind of things that I think is going to stick with me for a long time is just the character of Happy and his personality, because you immediately warm to him. He's so endearing. And he lives in this incredible imaginary world, and so unapologetically, which I think is just fantastic. Could you tell us a bit more? We've touched on it a little bit, but a bit more about finding his voice and kind of why he is the way he is. Was it difficult to develop? Was it something that just appeared in your head like magic? Please tell us more.
Of course. So Happy is an entirely fictional character. And even if the underlying facts are very real, if some of the trajectories we encounter in the book, are loosely based on real stories, he's a fictional character. And the starting point, like the moment that I finally found an entry into this book was in finding his voice. And that was when I wrote the cover letter, the letter of application, which is the prologue of the book. And I think all the years before, I tried to write it from, not the first person's view, but another perspective, and to allow myself to fully get into Happy's shoes. And then it really, the character then sort of happened. And of course, there might be chunks of me in there, and it's in your first book, I think it happens. But he really then just sort of poured out of me after years of trying to find this voice. And then I don't know how else to explain it. Maybe there was a bit of magic.
And I think there's also an element of he's a very young boy when we first meet him. And I think there's a sense of, we don't realize some of the try not to give anything away, it's so difficult. We don't realize certain things are happening because of this kind of endearing naivety about him. I don't even know if he sometimes realizes like how bad a situation is. So we're almost sort of realizing that with him, or realizing it with the people around him. So was that a conscious choice that you wanted him to be a young boy, or was it just his voice just came to you and you were like, okay, we're at this age?
Yeah, I think there's, of course, some grounding in the realities that, even if you look at the statistics, who's, migrating to Italy in the Punjabi community, it sort of takes place around the 2010 mark, at that time, and since the 90s. And of course, the North Indian communities in Italy are evolving, building lives, new generations, So it's all in a flow, and there's never one story that is a true story of non-resident Indians or, North Indians migrating to Europe. There's a million different stories. And so it's never, I wanted to be very careful never to seem like this is one true story of, a Punjabi migrating to Italy in an undocumented way, like not by the books. And that, it had to be a male voice because sort of that, it mostly is sort of young men, migrating to Italy to work. And then a majority is sort of working in the food industry and in the back of restaurant kitchens in Rome. And yeah, so finding the voice definitely had a lot of groundings in real life stories and research. And then a lot of that, it's not hidden. It can be, you just have to Google and you can find documentaries, you can find news articles, you can find research, you can find activists working on this topic. And some aspects of it, of course, you will never gain full entry because, I once tried speaking to someone, an Italian activist working on that in an Italian university context, and he really had to be quite mindful of his security. And that was something where I was also, wow, okay, this is a serious matter because the structures are linked to sort of criminal syndicates. And it's not unique to Italy. It's happening, if you look at the UK, if you look at Germany, if you look at the North America, sort of that the food industry or the wonderful things we can buy in supermarkets, the cheap radishes, the things we buy at Lidl, are possible for us to be affordable because the structures in which the people producing those work are criminal, are wildly underpaid, sort of. And then, of course, there are variations. There might be structures where it is the quality of life, the quality of the conditions of work are better, and maybe slightly improving. That's very important to say. This is not just one truth, but largely this is what we're looking at, and you just have to look at numbers and statistics. So this is not unique to Italy. This is not unique to the North Indian community from the rural context, coming to Italy. So saying that, again, Happy is an entirely fictional character, and his character, this was the way I found I was able to write the story, in this voice. And I do feel that very often, if we encounter, you can only start a journey by being optimistic, or there has to be a certain level of optimism about, okay, this is going to work out, it's going to be great, and this is what it's going to be like, and this is why I'm doing it. And then, of course, sometimes you live in structures where there's not a choice, it's but we're talking about definitely, one of the cores of the book is the belief in human mobility as a social right for all. And the fact that with certain passports, you are able to just say, hey, I want to study in Italy. I want to have a year abroad. I want to, have this experience. I want to go there to research. And then with some passports, you can't. And this is the basic underlying factor. So, of course, I'm mixing up two things. I'm mixing up an individual who wants to, he has big dreams about being an actor or a writer, both things you are, and then working in very different structures which don't allow for that unfolding of creative potential at all. But, I think that also Happy in a way is a workplace novel because it looks at different kind of workplaces and structures where the dynamics and scenarios and sort of ways of working together are not dissimilar to working in other environments and things we encountered, speaking from our perspectives living in Berlin or in the UK.
Yeah.
But then some are very unique to his context of working in the food industry in Italy without documents.
There's a huge abuse of power at play that you explore in the book, and I think you saying it's a workplace novel, it is quite devastating to see the effects of those working conditions and the impact that has. And I think thinking about the fact that we were reading this as actors and writers and kind of seeing this young boy wanting the same things, you realize the amount of privilege that you have as like a Western person, as like a white Western person, or a white person living in the Western world, having the privilege to be able to attempt to navigate this industry and have the privilege to do that. Whereas, for this young boy, he can't even say the word, he emigrates to Italy and then he ends up working on this radish farm, which isn't what he wants to be doing. And then he's completely taken advantage of, and he doesn't kind of get the same opportunities that other people would get. And I was unsure but I didn't think it was his imagination, but the moment with the audition, and he goes into the audition and he's essentially turned away because they're like, no, you're not what we're looking for. And you kind of know as the reader like what is behind those words. I did want to ask about the working conditions and about the protest in the book. And again, I'm not going to kind of go into detail on that, but essentially working conditions are so bad that workers protest. And I think that's something that we often see. Was there a particular story that inspired that narrative, or was there any particular research you came across that intrigued you, that you were like, yeah, okay, I want to include this in the book?
Definitely, there's many of them. So there's definitely real life stories that are also underlying to this book. And this is why I sort of carried the narrative around with me for so long. They formed the spark for the book, or the necessity to talk about it, because I think there are some stories, if they stay with you long enough, there is a certain, and I found it so difficult also for many years to try to find a way to tell a story that I always felt isn't mine to tell, maybe. But that's why I needed also to find this form in the end. So there are definitely real life stories that form the basis for the novel, and also stories that didn't end happily, but then also others that, found other ways. And I think that's definitely present in the book too, with Harbier, and how then there are, stories of migration that, take different routes and then continue to grow maybe in the new place in different ways, and then turn it around, which gives a sort of element of hope to it, but that, also mirrors how it can go very differently. And then there's a lot of research that, you can, as I said, you can find it if you also just try to dig a little, not even that deep, but it's widely available to any reader who's interested in it. Of course, there's the aspect that doing any research that would be on an investigative journalist level, I wasn't able to do, because it's just these conditions are not, nobody invites you in. It's like that's not part of the deal to be open to that, because they have the structures as they are that are criminal. And even trying to talk to people who really work on that, and because I really encourage that there are activists who work on that, who have the skill set and who really dig deep and have been working on it for years, trying to change the working structures, doing an amazing work. But even it wasn't even easy to talk to them. And then on another level, there are stories that are sort of hopeful. And one is an example of Milanese workers in the south of Italy, who, after racist incidents, there were big protests, and they then afterwards, in a sort of turn of events, founded their own initiative to, grow their own vegetables and sell their own yogurt on Roman markets. So there are stories like these, but they're very rare. And yeah, more often than not, there are not happy endings. But then it's always evolving. So, but then one interesting fact maybe is a Gran Padano industry, so a quintessential Italian product, cheese, has been in North Indian hands for many years, at least when I last sort of looked into it. And there are these phenomenons. If you look in the UK and if you look in Germany with the asparagus, so that entire sort of production sectors are in the hands of certain communities. And it's something that you might not expect, but it's interesting to look at and then see what that means. Not producing your own cheese, but a different culture's cheese.
It's so interesting, and I think that one of the parts of the book that I found really striking was your use of food, and obviously the food industry plays such a big part in Happy's journey, and I think that you also have this kind of really great way of making us delve into the sensory world of food. The sugar rotis, honestly, it was like mouth-watering. I'm like, yes. And you have this great way of kind of making food a real part of his life. Can you tell us a bit more about why you wanted food specifically to play a role in the book?
I think food this is not a new idea, but it's a universal language to us all. It's a purveyor of sort of it also holds an archive of knowledge. There's a lot in food that can speak to us, even if we don't speak the same language. That's a thing. And that if you're far away from home and if you live in a temporary housing of any sorts, but then you get a food from home, like that can really, it can be therapeutic, like it can really help you to, again, remember who you are or try to remember who you are. So this is definitely something that is important for the book. I mean, talking about the food industry, then it was a given for me to also have food. It's not the main lens for the novel, but it is definitely one defining aspect to build up the sensory world, but also to let Happy speak, to draw us in. And I remember, I think it was when I was at a curatorial residency in Shanghai, and I think there are moments when I definitely chose having this one bowl of sesame noodles over going to a museum. And that's people, what people might remember about me. And, even if it was my job, I might choose food over many other things. I'm afraid to admit. So yeah, definitely that was important for the book. And even if not all my writing, is food centered, it's definitely always there. And I remember, actually, it's interesting because I remember when I was growing up how the books of Enid Blyton, which is interesting to think about for the Indian context. There's a generation for whom the books of Enid Blyton were very important, but interesting to look at, how, the colonial aspects of, talking about food come in there. And then if you read about a buttered crumpet and then you taste it in real life, how that I've talked to, growing up in India and sort of idealizing these foods. But for me, definitely, I was always very fond of food descriptions in books and news literature, and always relished those. So yeah, that comes into it too.
Food is my absolute favorite. I love reading about food. I love eating food. I love everything about food. And Lydia was laughing because whenever a book has any form of food descriptions in, I am very happy.
Wonderful.
It's a problem. It's a problem.
So one of my favourite questions to ask our authors that come on is, what does a typical writing day in your life look like?
I love these questions. That's great. I always hope that one day I might get asked this question, but now is the day. So I do write in the early. I love to write in the early mornings. I have to trick myself into not starting to properly think, but to just, the first coffee rush is very important now, more so than ever. And in the past year, with a very young, a baby who didn't sleep very well. And so I was constantly in a very strange mode, but maybe that helps also. For me, constraints are also good. If I tell myself I have, 3 whole weeks to just write, that might not be a good thing, because then I might, if I tell myself, okay, you have 1 hour now, then you just go. And that is a good thing. I like to write fast and furious, even though I might have, notes on the wall, and, I like to surround myself with the books that that are important for the book, or objects around me. So definitely, I'm a cluttery person. I'm a big collector of things. So this plays a role, but then I just like to go for it and just write and let it flow. Music is important. I have a playlist for the novel that, was definitely also important for me to work to. And then the early morning. And of course, there were wonderful romantic moments when I was, in Rome, writing on a balcony, overlooking Messini or other restaurants that I was writing about, or the balcony in our old apartment in Berlin. Sort of very nooks and crannies where I felt like I was sitting somewhere very sort of apart from the world, not in cafes or something. No. So I like to create my own spaces around me, however small they might be. So I might then put up a few postcards, and I always did this, even when I was going on school trips. I remember, I think people made fun of me. They were very ugly lighting. Then I put a scarf over it, and then I put up my little postcards. I always created my own little worlds around me. So that's what I do in the book and in my writing process. And of course, reading also plays a role. So I might get up and then read a few pages of the book I'm just reading, or a book that isn't, literary, but maybe about the image of the character of Europe in cinema, or in theater history. I had a book like that, and just watch a little clip of Bonaparte, and then go back into the writing process.
I love hearing about people's writing process, and I'm really glad that you said that you have quite a cluttered space, because that makes me feel so much better about my cluttered space. I feel like clutter helps me a lot. I like having multiple things about, and it makes me feel creative, and it gets the juices flowing, you know.
It definitely does. It definitely does. And I think it's also maybe, I know people who are like, okay, they need these really clean chunks of time and a clean space and really dedicated to it. And I think I wrote a very good chapter I loved while I was actually walking through a snowstorm with my baby in a carrier. And I was writing on my phone. Like, this is what I did at one point during the editing process. I mean, it wasn't like all the book was written that way, but I think you can. And not to say that everybody has to, you know, it's like, it's great if you have a clean space and clean amount of time, but sometimes it's a bit messy, and that's okay, I feel.
Absolutely. I'm speaking for both of us when I say that you've been an absolute joy to chat to. So thank you so much. We are unfortunately going to squeeze in another question because it's our favourite. And that is, have you got any recommendations? Is there anything that you've been enjoying recently that you want to share with our listeners?
So maybe it's a good thing because like cinema plays a role in the novel. So I think there is a song that Happy dances to, Masakali, and it's from the movie Delhi 6, which I watched when I was in Delhi in 2009 as an intern in a gallery. And so I have all these romantic memories linked to it. So I just love this song, and listen to this song, please, and watch the movie if you get a chance, about the old Delhi, sort of quarter of Delhi. And then another one is there's a whole constellation of things that were maybe inspirations for me, for Happy. Uski Roti is also sort of Indian neorealist cinema, Punjabi housewife waiting for her husband at a bus stop every day to deliver a daily lunch to sort of balance the contemporary Delhi 6 movie. And then I love the works of the video artist Mika Rottenberg, and she always has these, like, produces very visceral, bodily video art that is also funny and very human. And it's about work processes, and with a heavy sort of emphasis on female sort of workers in her movies working together to produce really crazy things. And one thing you could watch first is Doe. I think you can watch it online at the Guggenheim somewhere. So maybe look into her work, and really it's a joy to watch, and it's fun, and it's really great. So always inspiring for me.
I knew you'd come through with great recommendations. I just knew it. So thank you. For our listeners, Happy is published by Wildfire, as I said before, and it will be published on the 14th of November in the UK. Is it going to be published anywhere else as well?
Yeah, so the original publishing house is Astor House in the US. So the book launch events will be sort of there. Then I will have a Berlin book launch later on. And I hope that at some point I will also come to the UK for readings. That would be so lovely.
Please do, yes. We would love to come to that as well.
Yeah.
If you have any events, please let us know. And that is unfortunately all we've got time for. Thank you so much, Celina. This has genuinely been such a joy. I'm so grateful for your time and your words, and we both really enjoyed this book, and I think it is definitely unlike anything I've read before. So thank you for coming on A Pair of Bookends.
Thank you so much. It was a joy to talk to you. I could go on forever. You were lovely and amazing, and thank you so much.
You can definitely come again. And for our listeners, I will be popping a link in the show notes to pre-order yourselves a copy of Happy. And also for our listeners, can they find you anywhere on social media?
Yeah, they can find me on Instagram. I'm on Twitter, but I feel like, I'm not really very active there. But on Instagram for sure, yeah.
Twitter's becoming something else, so we won't speak about that.
I know. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And for our listeners, if you want to give us a follow, you can do so at apairofbookendspod on Instagram and at apairofbookends on Twitter and TikTok. As always, we will pop links to all of those in the show notes. And thank you so much for listening. And thank you again to Celina for joining us. Goodbye.
Goodbye.